today, you're here to see this guy. His name is Chris O'Leary, and he is a journalist and he's an editor. He's based in Easthampton. He's written for Entertainment Weekly, Encyclopedia Britannica, and he's interviewed everyone from the former head of the Lehman Brothers Bank to Kiefer Sutherland. So it's quite a spectrum. We want to thank Luthier's Co-op for having us here today and hosting this awesome event. And Matt Medeiros, who's in charge of the music for the day. So he's your soundtrack for the book. So a little bit about Rebel Rebel. It's Chris's very first book. Clap for that. And this book is the first of 2 volumes that's going to be telling basically David Bowie's whole story and culture in all kinds of Venn diagram ways to history and music and literature and all that good stuff. And it's based on a blog that he started in 2009 called Pushing Ahead of the Dame. And that was also started 2 weeks before we met. So he's my other half. So any questions? You're going to do great. All right. Books and merch and other things are over there. Beer and cold things and everything is over there. Have a great evening and enjoy.
Thanks for coming. As Sarah said, I'm Chris O'Leary. I wrote a book. I did not intend to imagine I was writing a book when I started this blog, which was really just a way to, do something at breakfast, I thought. Oh, listen to a Bowie song. I'll write about it on the internet. And 5 years later, it's all this, so I'm very grateful. I'm not going to say much right now except that Matt Medeiros is going to start us off with 2 early Bowie songs. One is called The Supermen, which is very classic Bowie. It involves giants killing each other with superhuman race, mermen, right? That's in the mermen. It's pretty epic. It's sort of half Friedrich Nietzsche, half Marvel Comics. And he's also going to do a song called In the Heat of the Morning, which is a very early 1968 Bowie song, which was rejected by his label, unfortunately. But his label hated him at the time and wanted to be rid of him, and they lost out on this very nice song. So here's Matt Medeiros.
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. Here we go. When all the world was very young, mountain magic heavy hung, supermen would walk in file, guardians of a loveless isle, and gloomy browed with super fear, their endless tragic lives could hear no sound. Voluptuous serenity, wondrous beings chained to life. Strange games they would play then. No death for the perfect man. Life flowed into one for them. So softly, a super god cried. All their minds in unithought, powers with through mystics taught, no pain, no joy, no power too great. Colossal strength to crush a fate, with sad-eyed mermaids tossed in slumbers, nightmare dreams no mortal mind could know. Man would tear his brother's flesh, a chance to die, to turn to mold. games they would play then. No death for the perfect men. Life goes into one for them. So softly a super god cried. Far out in the red sky, far out in the sad eye, strange mad celebrations. So softly a super god dies. Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to do this song in the heat of the morning, and I just wanted to reiterate what a great book it is that Chris has put together. I read it in the course of putting this show together, and it's just really amazing. It's not just like, you know, stories about David Bowie hanging out with Elton John or things like that. It's really about the music, and it's really comprehensive. It's got like demos of songs that Bowie did that were never released, and so, you know, if you're really obsessive about music, or even, you know, if maybe you're just a casual fan, I think it would be a pretty cool thing to check out. So I really recommend it. And so this is called In the Heat of the Morning. The blazing sunset in your eyes will tantalize every man who looks your way. I watch them sink beneath your gaze, senorita sway, dance with me before their frozen eyes. Oh, I'm so much in love, like a ragged boy who's blowing in the wind. No man loves like I love you, wouldn't you like to love me too? In the heat of the morning, in the shadow I'll clip your wings, and I'll tell you I love you. In the heat of the morning, I'll tie a knot in Rainbow's End, organize a breeze, I'll do anything for you. I'll light my candle from the sun, I'll do all of this, I'll show that it can be done. Oh, I'm so much in love, like a ragged soldier chasing butterflies. Like I love you, wouldn't you like to love me too? In the heat of the morning, in the shadow I'll clip your wings, and I'll tell you I love you. In the heat of the morning, Thanks.
So This reading is going to be multimedia, I hope. So people on the other side of the screen, if you want to see some of the clips that hopefully will call up, come around there. But it's not essential, but it's fun. There's some good stuff. Okay, this is Space Oddity. Does everybody know Space Oddity? Does anybody not know Space Oddity? Okay, that makes sense. Oh, Ada does not. That's understandable. Space Oddity is basically the first real David Bowie song. It's his first single for the label Philips Mercury. It's his first British top 5 hit. It's his first American top 20 hit. Years later, his first British #1. Space Oddity leads off the album it later titled. It leads off pretty much every Bowie compilation in retrospective. And when he dies, the TV tributes and the internet tributes will lead off with it, probably. But it had a strange beginning. Its status as the first classic Bowie song came in a roundabout way. It was considered a novelty single with a sell-by date, the July 1969 moon landing. Space Oddity didn't chart until months after the moonshot, and its highest chartings came in the mid-'70s. Some in the Bowie camp thought it was a mistake. His friend and producer Tony Visconti refused to produce it, considering it cheap, a sellout publicity stunt. It's not a David Bowie record, it's Ernie the Milkman, he told him. He was right, in a way, in a hock to the Bee Gees' Death Bubblegum song, New York Mining Disaster, 1941, similar in tone to In the Year 2525. Space Oddity is, in a way, a gimmicky folk song in extravagant garb. That's good stuff. In December 1968, David Bowie's manager Kenneth Pitt funded Love You Till Tuesday, a collection of promotional videos. He hoped to revive a moribund career, with Love You Till Tuesday serving as Bowie's visual resume for film and TV producers. So there'd be promos shot for older songs like Love You Till Tuesday itself, outtakes, and even a mime piece. The film lacked anything fresh, so Kenneth Pitt told Bowie to come up with, quote, another strong song. So Bowie retreated to his room, where he was living at the time in Clareville Grove in London. As it turned out, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey had opened in London in May 1968 and played for months, mainly to the young and the altered. Bowie saw 2001 several times and was taken by Stanley Kubrick's shots, a star child looming above the Earth, the dead astronaut Frank Poole floating off into space, an astronaut having a stilted one-way conversation with his parents via video phone. Like 2001, much science fiction of the time, especially British science fiction, which was very depressing, suggested humanity's venture into space would drive it mad or transfigure it in some way. Pretty much any science fiction short story you find, for example, Ray Bradbury's No Particular Night or Morning, has a deranged astronaut throwing himself into space. Gordon Walter's No Guarantee has an astronaut violently hallucinating while talking to ground control. And Terry Pratchett's The Night Dweller, the character, another astronaut, realized we were in a void with nothing below us. It was cold and empty and hostile. But clashing against this doom backdrop were the American astronauts. Genial ex-athletes equipped with beautiful wives, sets of healthy children. NASA was vending space, wrote Norman Mailer, interviewing the Apollo 11 crew before the moonshot. Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, was, in Mailer's words, a salesman with a clear, mild, modest, soft sell. Yet there was something uncanny in the Apollo astronauts as well, something beyond the jokes about astronaut food and golf and the hundreds of tedious tasks they were going to perform in space as if they were celestial mechanics. For Mailer, someone like Armstrong, had something close to schizophrenia in his lack of reaction to the absolute dangers about him. The astronauts had an easy familiarity with death. They were salesmen over an abyss. Bowie's Major Tom's disaster, if it's even a disaster at all, voiced a collective dread that the moon landing would go horribly wrong and on live television. In fact, the BBC wouldn't play Space Oddity until the moonshot was over because a song in which an astronaut didn't return home seemed in questionable taste to them. And Bowie back on Earth, playing his 12-string Hegstrom acoustic guitar in his room, was nowhere. After 4 years in pop music, Bowie, this is 1968, Bowie had no record contract and just a handful of folk and mime gigs. He considered abandoning pop music for mime, musical theater. He auditioned for Hair, didn't get the part. Film parts, modeling, Buddhism, anything. His most lucrative job of the period was a bit part in a TV spot for Love Ice Cream. But his manager kept telling him work would turn up. And so Major Tom is sent into orbit by establishment figures who monitor him, give him stage directions, need him to do his share of media promotion. The song ends with Major Tom ignoring cues and walking off stage. And Bowie was writing as the first real relationship of his life crumbled, cutting a take the day after his break with Hermione Farthingale, who was just singing there. So there was a numbness in the song, a longing to sever ties and drift into the void. Yet though all of this was swirling in the song, a technocrat American astronaut cracking up like he was in a Kurt Vonnegut novel, a failed pop singer, writing a letter to his girlfriend out in space, there were pantomime and childlike qualities as well. Buried within Space Oddity were some favorite tunes of Bowie's boyhood, like Frank Lesser's Inchworm, whose semitonal melody you'll hear in the stylophone, the synthesizer. There's also Over the Rainbow in some of it. There's the schlocky, hand-wringing "She Knows" from Ground Control, which comes out of nowhere when Major Tom tells his wife he loves her. There's goofy bits like the cod Italian pronunciation of "most a peculiar way." And two kids could perform the song in walkie-talkies. Bowie used the simplest of rhymes and favored the kids' word over the bureaucrats. It's a spaceship, not a rocket. It's a countdown, not an ignition sequence. Even Major Tom was an action hero's name. The Apollo 11 astronauts called their capsule the Cathedral, but it was just a tin can here. You could see the wires it hung from. What's after that? I don't know which one's next. Which one? Oh yeah, don't do that.
From your day can haunt you at night.
And the mood is totally spoiled. Man, I think the tracks are coming up then. Yeah, the stuff, so I'll keep going. Advil PM, Bowie recommends it for headaches. Bowie had never written anything on such a scale before. In a touch over 5 minutes in Space Oddity, there's an intro, a 12-bar solo verse, a liftoff sequence, a duet verse, a bridge, a 2-bar acoustic guitar break, a guitar solo, another verse, another bridge, break and solo, and a Beatles Day in the Life style outro to the fade. In 2002, Bowie said he'd been keen on writing in such a way that it would lead me into leading some kind of rock musical. That's probably what I wanted to do in the late 60s. I think I wanted to write a new kind of musical, and that's how I saw my future at the time. So he storyboarded the song out in a way. Each section sets up the next. The spoken 10, 9, 8 countdown backing vocal building suspense. The acoustic guitar breaks serving as stage clearing of a sort. The chord sequence was a fruit of a year's dabbling in folk music with John Hutchinson, the fellow who was playing in that trio with him. And over a few nights at Clareville Grove, translated Bowie's odder ideas into fret shapes. Well, I realize I've forgotten, it's in my bag. The xylophone? Yes. See if I remember this, how it works. Bowie used the stylophone, which is a cheap, primitive synthesizer that was being marketed to kids in the late 60s. And you can see how he came up with a lot of the song. things like that. Multimedia. Yes. I had to practice that for 10 minutes. The chord pairings of the intro and the first verses alternating C major and E minor chords presented a division to be exploited. Yo, technical. Mick Wayne, the guitarist, sounds two guitar harmonics. And Bowie's stylophone, not yet. Drones two whole notes a half step apart. Before the verse starts, Major Tom is already high in space and ground control is far below him. The song was full of these sort of little resonances, its harmonic language telling part of its story. For much of the song, the early part of the song, it's C major and E minor, and suddenly the song goes to E major to kind of change the feeling of the song, a move harmonically as Bowie's vocal leap on the post-liftoff. This is ground control to Major Tom. And now back to the video. This is the confusing part. And then back to the tracks after this. Yes. Bowie and John Hutchinson cut Space Oddity for the first time for that movie, Love You Till Tuesday, in February 1969. Recording the track the day before this rather awful promo film was made. It's a strange recording. The drumming is pretty all over the place, and there's an ocarina solo. Hutchinson had been the song's only voice until midway through the second verse. And the guiding principle was Simon and Garfunkel. Bowie would be Garfunkel, Hutchinson would be Simon, and then Bowie had to take over both roles. All right, so now all the tracks, yeah. This version didn't have the stylophone much, but the single, it was back to what you heard. Making the stylophone central to the Space Oddity single gave it a sort of futuristic hook, added to its hokey charm. It was recorded at a top studio at a pretty big budget, but it had a winning sense of amateurishness. The orchestral instruments played more secondary roles. The strings, massed entrance, and the liftoff sequence. The flute, and that's good enough. The bow scrapings in the outro, kind of a homage to the composer Jorgi Ligeti's Atmospheres, which was used in 2001. But this was all kind of secondary colors. Instead, the two synthesizers, the meek stylophone and the grand mellotron, bore much of the song's dramatic weight. They were vocal chorus and string section. They were organ and saxophone and strings and saxophone. Gus Dudgeon, the producer, mapped out the recording like a battle plan. Unable to write music, he used colors, so cellos were brown, and squiggly lines to mark where he wanted instruments to come in. The arranger Paul Buckmaster translating the scrawls into charts for the musicians. With only 8 tracks at hand, Dudgeon had to be economical, leading to inspired moves like recording the lead guitar in the same track as a stylophone and creating the sense the two instruments form a spectrum. Struggling to keep his borrowed guitar in tune, Mick Wayne cut a take with a flat bass string, the warped note swamped with reverb, but Dudgeon liked the sound and told him not to retune it. Matt, there we go, yeah. For his 2 solos, Bowie asked him to play like the jazz guitarist Wes Montgomery, which in his words meant to play octaves. They were a pair of sweeping orbits, the last escaping Earth's pull. And finally, the secret movers were the bassist and the drummer. Herbie Flowers and Terry Cox. They were both sort of folk and jazz guys, which served the song well. Somebody with a more rock and roll bent may have struggled with what's essentially a pop tone poem. And it ends, they were told to do what they want for the outro, so the two basically play a jazz duet. This is all while the crazy strings are happening. All right. So the world, or at least one small corner of London, first heard Space Oddity in July 1969 when it played over the PA system during the Rolling Stones' free concert in Hyde Park. But the single barely charted upon release, and sales soon tapered off despite his manager paying a chart rigger £140 just to get the single into England's equivalent to Billboard, record retailer. So here it seemed was the maddening last chapter of Bowie's career, the song that his label, manager, and his friends thought was the one. The song he felt forced into recording. His big sellout Ernie the Milkman record had suffered yet another chart death, performing little better than any other single he'd put out. And then he caught a break. With the dearth of new releases in September '69, his label's marketing director sent his entire staff to flogging the single. By November, Space Oddity was back in the charts, peaking at number 5. It helped that the serious, quote, rock acts had abandoned the singles charts, clearing room for middle-aged singers, celebrity vanity records, cartoons, the occasional reggae masterpiece, and a few weird one-offs like Space Oddity, which sounded like nothing else, but it sounded like 1969. A novelty song for a dying decade, Space Oddity, should have faded away, but it kept being called back for encores. It was an American hit in 1973, and 2 years later, it was reissued in Britain. And with Major Tom no longer an ominous future, but a faded keepsake, it hit number 1. A breakup song, a child song, a death song, a prison song, a showbiz song, a Bee Gees song, a first and a last song. Space Oddity made Bowie as much as he'd made it. And then he remade it. At the end of the 70s, for a New Year's Eve telecast called Will Kenny Everett Ever Make It to 1980? He did. Bowie sheared the song down to acoustic guitar, modest piano, bass and drums.
Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. Commencing countdown, engines on.
Instead of the liftoff sequence, there were 12 seconds of silence. The feel was John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band, a song being questioned, shut down in a way. Instead of the spiraling outward coda, it was just a faded out snare drum. The original Space Oddity ended unresolved. The door of Major Tom's capsule was left open. It suggested some kind of escape was possible, even for, in Bowie's words, a corporate-sponsored loser like Major Tom. But this kind of violent reduction of the song closed it off a bit. Space seemed empty. And soon afterward, Bowie decided to look up Major Tom to see what had become of him, and wrote a song called Ashes to Ashes, which is not in the book. The next one. Space Oddity is nearly half a century old. Born mournful, it's become a bit more so. Bowie had felt something link the Apollo astronauts, who thought they'd be the opening act of a new age of space exploration, and turned out to be one-hit wonders. All the doomed astronauts of science fiction, all the lost boys of the imploding counterculture. The American space program began an unchecked slide into irrelevance. The year 2001 was not marked by Stanley Kubrick's Jupiter mission, but by fanatics destroying New York skyscrapers. And in 2013, when humanity had gone no further into space than it had when Space Oddity charted, a version sung by the Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, filmed on board the International Space Station, went viral. A video of a man singing and sitting in a tin can that many had forgotten was still out in space. Hadfield was a project manager who had a glorious view from his office windows.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Bowie once said he considered the fate of Major Tom to be the technocratic American mind coming face to face with the unknown and blanking out. His song was a moonshot year prophecy that we would lose our nerve, sink back into the old world, that we aren't built for transcendence, that the sky is the limit.
Ground control
Or as Chris Hadfield sings from space in a bit in this video, planet Earth is blue and there's nothing left to do. Thank you.
Engines on. Detach from station and make eyes like me with you.
This is Luke Cavanaugh, and Jeff Lloyd, and they're going to be doing a number of songs. They're going to be leading off with Moon Age Daydream, the classic from Ziggy Stardust, and then they'll be doing a song called Memory of a Free Festival, which is sort of from the same period of Space Oddity, and then Rock and Roll Suicide, and what was the last one? And of course, the song which the title of my blog comes from, called Queen Bitch, and it's one of my favorite songs.
We're pushing all the Bowie buttons up here right now. Those astronauts are such losers. Corporate losers, sorry. Can everybody hear me? How does it start? Let's start with the... One, two, three. I'm an alligator. I'm a mama copper coming for you. I'm a space invader. I'll be a rock and roller bitch for you. Keep your mouth shut. I'm squawking like a pink monkey bird. Sorry, I got the chords wrong. I'm busting up my brains for the words. And keep your electric eye on me, babe. And put your ray gun to my head. Put your space face close to mine, love. Freak out, it's a moon age stadium, oh yeah. Don't fake it, baby. Lay the real thing on me. Yeah, the church of man love. It's such a holy place to be. Fake it, baby. Sorry. In a moon age daydream, oh yeah. Don't fake it, baby. You lay the real thing on me. Yes, the church of my love. It's such a holy place to be. Fake me, baby. Make me know you really care. Or make me jump into the air. electric. Sorry, that was our version. Yeah, that was a little chaotic. It goes with the spirit. You ready for the other one? I'm going to need like 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 people up here for the chorus at the end of this. So anyone who wants to can sing it with me. Children? The children of the summer's end, they gathered in the dampened grass. We played our songs and felt the London sky resting on our hands. It was God's land. It was ragged and naive, and it was heaven. We touched the very soul of holding each and every life. We claimed the very source of joy ran through. It didn't, but it seemed that way. I kissed a lot of people on that day. Oh, to capture just one drop of all the ecstasy that swept that afternoon, to paint that love upon a white balloon and fly it from the toppest top of all the tops that man has pushed beyond his brain. Satori must be something just the same. We scan the skies with rainbow eyes and saw machines of every shape and size. We talked to tall Venetians passing through, and Peter tried to climb aboard, but the captain shook his head, and away they soared, climbing through the ivory, vibrant cloud. Someone passed some bliss among the crowd, and we walked back to the road unchained. The sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. Come on up now. The sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. Yeah, the sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. Oh, yeah, the sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I said the sun machine is coming down. Yeah. I said the sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. Everyone, now the sun machine is coming down. I said the sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. Yes, the sun machine is coming down. We're gonna have a party. The sun machine is coming down, and we're gonna have a party. I said the sun machine is coming down. We're gonna have a party.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, my name's Talvez, and I'm going to do Rock and Roll Suicide and Queen Bitch. I don't know where everyone else is. Yeah. Anyway. Time takes a cigarette, puts it in your mouth, pull out your finger, and another finger, and then cigarettes. Wall to wall is calling, it lingers, then you forget. Oh, you're a rock and roll suicide. You're too young to lose it, too young to choose it, and the clock waits so patiently on your song. You walk past a cafe, but you don't eat when you've lived too long. Oh, you're a rock and roll suicide. Shed breaks are snarling as you stumble across the road. Day breaks instead, so you hurry home. Don't let the sun blast your shadow. Don't let the milk flood ride your mind. You're so natural, religiously unkind. Oh no, love, you're not alone. Watching yourself, it's too unfair. Got your head all tangled up, but I could only make you care. No, love, you're not alone. No matter what you've been, no matter where you sing, all the knives seem to lacerate your brain. I've had my share, I'll help you with the pain. You're not alone. Just turn on with me. You're not alone. Let's turn on and be not alone. Give me your hands. You're not alone. Give me your hands. You're wonderful. Oh, just give me your hands. I get really nervous, so I messed up a little bit, sorry. I blame Bowie because he has so many chords and words in all these songs.
his queen bitch. Ba ba da 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 da. Oh yeah! Let's go. I'm up on the 11th floor, watching the cruisers below. He's down on the street, and he's trying hard to pull Sister Flo. My heart's in the basement, my weekend's at an all-time low. 'Cause she's hoping to score, and I can't see her letting him go. Walk out on her heart, walk out on her mind. Oh no, not me. She's so swishy in her satin and tie, in a frock coat and bippity-boppity hat. Oh God, I could do better than that. She's an old-time ambassador of sweet-talking, night-walking dames. Known in the darkest clubs for pushing ahead of the dames. That's the title of the book. Sassy's a sassy. Settled and sucked from the blade. As she's leading him on, and she lay him right down. As she's leading him on, and she lay him right down. And it could have been me. Oh yes, it could have been me. Why didn't I say? Why didn't I say? Oh no, no, she's so swishy in her satin and tie, in a frock coat and bippity-boppity hat. Oh God, I could do better than that. So I lay down a while, just gaze at my hotel walls. Clock feels so cold, don't feel like no bed at all. So I lay down a while and just look at my hotel walls. He's down on the street, so I throw both his bags down the hall. Now he's phoning a cab, because my stomach feels small. There's a taste in my mouth, but it's no taste at all. And it could have been me, oh yeah, it could have been me. Why didn't I say? Why didn't I say? Oh no, no, she's so swishy in her satin and tie, in a frock coat and bippity-boppity hat. Oh God, I could do better than that. You betcha. Uh-huh. Sorry, little.
All right, so thanks again, everybody, for coming. We got one more song, basically, and the mic was changed, so I got to be on my feet a little bit. This is Police Kittens. This is Bob Fay and Andy Goulet. This is a song called Soul Love, which people may not know unless you're like more of a hardcore Bowie fan. It's a song that is sort of sandwiched between two epic songs on Ziggy Stardust. The opener, 5 Years, and Moon Age Daydream, which you heard earlier. But it's a great, interesting, and sweet little song. Though not that sweet. There aren't that many Bowie love songs, and if you think about it, and there's a reason. Bowie, for a long time, didn't believe in love songs. In 1976, he said, "I was in love once, maybe, and it was an awful experience. It rotted me, it drained me, it was a disease. A hateful thing it was." This is what he told Cameron Crowe, the reporter at Rolling Stone, later immortalized in Almost Famous. But despite that, this is one of his sweeter songs, even though in typical Bowie fashion, Soul Love shows up love as being kind of not quite that great. It kind of sweeps over cross and baby in the line like a plague or an infestation. But but this version could be much different. Change the lyrics to this more sweetness. Again, this is Police Kittens. Police Kittens. This is Soul Love.
All right. This tune is by David Bowie. Stone love, she kneels before the grave, a brave son who gave his life to see the slogan that hovers between the headstone and her eyes. For they penetrate her grieving. You love a boy and girl are talking new words that only they can share in new words. A love so strong it tears their hearts to sleep. Though they're finding hours of mourning, love is careless in its choosing, sweeping over, cross the baby. Love depends on those defenseless. Idiot love will talk confusion. Inspirations have I none, just to touch the flaming dove. All I have is my love of love, and others are loving. To taste the word out told of love. Lord my God on high is all love. The reaching up my loneliness upon by the blindness that surrounds me. Love is careless in its choosing, sweeping over, across the baby. Love descends on those defenseless. Idiot love will cause the fusion. Inspirations have I known, just to touch the flaming dove. All I have is my love of love, and love is not loving. Thank you.